Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Asia podcast. I'm Brian Curtis along with Doug Krisner. Join us each day for the stories making news and moving markets in the Asia Pacific. You can subscribe to the show anywhere you get your podcasts and always on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Terminal, and the Bloomberg Business app.
Donald Trump has been found guilty on all 34 felony counts. He says he's a political prisoner. District Attorney Alvin Bragg says the system worked just the way it does in all criminal trials. Joining us here is Bloomberg's Patricia Hurtado, Manhattan Federal Courthouse and Legal Enterprise reporter for Bloomberg. Patricia, long day. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a historic day. Let's kind of go through it. So the jury wanted some clarification starting this morning. It appears that Justice Merchan was ready to send them home for the day. They informed him they had a verdict. Was this a surprise?
It was a surprise. Everyone, even several of my colleagues had already tweeted out, no jury verdict today, goodbye. And then all of a sudden, the jury had been very quiet all day long. But yesterday, they had asked for some testimony, which was about the Trump Tower meeting, where Michael Cohen, Trump's former lawyer and fixer, said that, this is where the deal was hatched to buy catch and kill scheme. And Trump was there supposedly with David Pecker, the publisher of the National Enquirer, as well as Michael Cohen. And Todd Blanchett said on Tuesday in closing statements that Cohen had completely contradicted Pecker. I actually went back and looked at the testimony, and then we heard the readback this morning. And then you realize that actually wasn't necessarily the case. I kind of wondered what was going to happen, but I thought, okay, another day, we can all take a big breath. And then for that note to come in, there's a buzzer in the courtroom. It's like one of those old-fashioned doorbells. And that has been going off every time the jury had a verdict. But then all of a sudden the judge goes, we have a note from the jury to have a verdict. The jury wants 55 minutes to fill it out.
Yeah, no, it looks very much. I mean, you went back and looked through that, and you're awfully good. So it looks like the jury was really paying attention and wanted that question answered, and that's what it wanted. Now, the defense started to make arguments toward potential of appealing. At least that's what I'm hearing, laying the groundwork anyway. Is that fair? And if so, how will that work?
Well, Todd Blanche, Trump's lead lawyer, already made that request. He said that Michael Cohen's testimony was unbelievable. He's a liar, and therefore the conviction should be overturned. And Merchan gave short notice to that one, and basically said absolutely denied. So, I mean, he technically under New York state law, I've talked to a couple of criminal defense lawyers I know, under state law, the defendant cannot appeal until they're sentenced, and that's tentatively set for July 11th at this point. So he can't start launching his appeal formally until then. He made a shot today, but that was rejected. He can try to ask the Manhattan appeals courts and maybe the state's highest court and maybe even the Supreme Court to weigh in, but right now he's in the limbo of waiting to be sentenced by Judge Merchan.
Yeah, so sentencing, as you say, July 11th, tentatively. Trump is a former president. There's a lot to consider for the judge. On the other hand, Judge Merchan said that he will treat him like any other convict and like any other trial. So what is the precedent in prior cases? Jail time, probation?
Well, we do have one inkling of what could happen. I mean, many people have speculated that Trump is a first-time offender and for his elected office might get an easier time from the judge. That, he might get probation or house arrest or a sentence where he has to do 6 months or 3 months in a facility or home detention, right? But one thing, President, we have to kind of remind ourselves is Trump's former CFO at the Trump org is Alan Weisselberg, pretty much the same age as Trump, and he was sent to Rikers Island for 5 months after he pled guilty to 13 felonies, and they were also white-collar crimes. So I think you have to kind of remember, and also, what the jury voted today and found was that Trump basically robbed voters of the election and rigged it so that he could hide this terrible story about having an affair with a porn star and paying her silence. So, I mean, that might be something he's an elected official and he's running for re-election. But then again, how did he get elected if this is what the jury's verdict is?
Yeah, but that's what the case was about,
right.
as you well know. Yeah. And now, as I understand it, maximum 4 years. Now, is that on each individual count, or could it be 34 times 4, or could they run concurrent, or do we have any inkling?
Yeah, it would probably, most of the lawyers I've talked to said, as a first-time offender who's in his 70s, it would be, concurrent. And it's 1 1/3 to 4. And I know some of my editors have been perplexed under the New York State court system, but some people actually get sentenced to 1 1/3 to 4 years, and then they do the minimum of that. So it's unclear, they get a discount for good behavior if they're sent to prison or some kind of incarceration. So it's unclear whether Judge Mershon may try to broker some kind of creative option for Trump.
Do we have any idea at all whether we will hear from jurors? In some cases, they want to come forward. In other cases, they want to stay silent. My inclination would be that they're going to want to stay behind the scenes for a variety of reasons on this. Have we heard anything?
No, I was telling our colleague, June Grasso, this earlier. I'm always shocked when I was shocked earlier in this trial when they were doing jury selection. Several jurors, potential jurors, had expressed concern of their safety, and then they walked out the courtroom front door and walked out and gave interviews live on national network television. So I was always like, really? You want to get excused because you're afraid if now you're on national television. So how afraid are you? It's unclear. The judge did warn them that, to be careful, that they could speak if they wanted. And I'm sure the dance of the seven veils will be done soon by many of these producers and bookers who want to get these jurors on and hear the whole story. I mean, we had asked, I'm part of the media coalition of reporters who represent the press corps on this case, and we had asked the judge to allow us to interview, because of the historic nature of this case, we asked him for permission to interview the prospective jurors, any jurors who wanted to talk, in the safe space of a courtroom, and we would interview them, and that way no one would chase them. That was soundly rejected. All right. Now they may be hounded.
Yeah. Patricia, you are awesome. It's been a long day. We're all witness to history, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
All right. We appreciate your time so much. Bloomberg's Patricia Hurtado, Manhattan Federal Courthouse legal enterprise reporter.
Well, joining us now on the program is Jeremy Rosenthal, trial attorney. Jeremy, what really was an election interference case, not a hush money trial, but I'm curious whether you think people will actually see it that way.
I don't know how people are going to view it. I mean, we're all sort of in this world where I think everybody's sort of made their mind up about everything, right? There is a little bit of irony here, right? That the panic in this case that the prosecution laid out in the beginning was that, look, the Trump campaign in October of 2016 was that they were going to lose a presidential election. And now that we've seen 8 years later, this is certainly a bad news cycle for their team. So it's kind of ironic that it's come full circle like this to set in probably what is a new round of panic for Mr. Trump and his team trying to get elected for president a second time.
Well, Donald Trump says he didn't do anything wrong. That suggests that the jury got it wrong, but the evidence appears to be compelling. What's the grounds for an appeal here?
There's not a lot. Appeals are a really hard business. There's a few grounds that I think they're going to focus on. One is going to be what we call the jury unanimity issue, which there's been a lot made of it in the last few days. And to kind of nerd out for just 2 minutes, if you'll indulge me, it's really, really hard it's a difficult issue to explain. But take, for instance, a driving while intoxicated case or a DUI. The jury doesn't have to necessarily agree how you got drunk, and they don't have to agree what signs of intoxication you're exhibiting. Is your blood alcohol above the limit? Are you losing the normal use of your mental or physical faculties? The jury doesn't have to agree. They just have to agree that you're a drunk driver. In this case, what the judge said was, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you don't have to agree how Donald Trump was covering up a felony. You just have to agree that there was one. In other words, 6 of you can agree that this was covering up tax fraud, and 6 of you can agree that this was covering up election fraud. And so long as you get there, you can convict him. That's what we call a unanimity issue. And because juries do have to be unanimous under the Constitution, that can very well trigger a stronger appellate issue. But even then, I think it's based on some pretty well-settled law. I wouldn't expect an appeal here to have much legs.
So a few things will happen prior to any appeal. And I'm curious what you think about whether or not, once we get to the final judgment and once we get to the sentence, if it involves jail time, whether or not you think that Donald Trump would be remanded to jail. In other words, he would not be out while the appeal is being prepared. Mm-hmm. Your thoughts on that?
I'd be fairly surprised if he went to jail. First, I read a report just the other day which suggested that for this type of offense in this jurisdiction, about 1 out of 10 people go to jail for this charge. Donald Trump is a 77-year-old man. He's got no criminal history. So you would think that he would be a high candidate for probation. Also, really, he's also the most secure person in the planet already, if you think about it, because he's surrounded 24/7 by government agents already, the Secret Service. So he's not going anywhere, and in many ways, he's kind of already trapped. I would anticipate that if he does see any type of incarceration, that it could be some kind of home confinement. Even then, even on July 11th, if he does get sentenced to jail, assuming it's a moderate or low sentence, he can file an appeal which will abate that sentence well off into probably 2025 and potentially 2026.
One thing the judge did warn about was violations of gag orders. If that keeps happening, might that change the picture vis-a-vis jail time?
It could. Think about it like this. So we had this gag order, and then we had Donald Trump, who kind of does his thing where he sort of kind of comes right up to the line, and maybe he crosses the line, and if he does, he doesn't do it really severely, or he comes sort of close to it. And Judge Marchand really found himself in a power struggle with this defendant, which is very, very rare. I mean, you've got a situation where Trump was, in many ways, almost daring the judge to put him in jail. If you put Donald Trump on probation, Judge Marchand knows he's just signing up for more of those fights, right? He's signing up for more of these, I'm going to violate probation, I'm going to violate, I'm going to test you. So maybe the easiest way to do that is just to give him a jail sentence. Then if he does that, Trump appeals it. If Trump wins the election, then maybe it's in the governor of New York's hands to whether or not he wants to pardon Trump at that point. But that's maybe how I see this playing out.
I'll give you a chance to nerd out a little bit more because what was interesting was the jury returned the verdict very quickly. It was just a day and a half, something like that. So that sort of shows you that they were pretty clear on this. So I'm curious from your standpoint what the prosecutors actually did to simplify this case and present it what seems to be so effectively.
This is what I would call a paper cut strategy. What they did was they put witness after witness after witness. There was 22 witnesses in this case, 21 of whom were not Michael Cohen. And most of those witnesses, it was really difficult for Trump to get a square punch on. You had the first third, if you will, of the trial was setting up the motive that the Trump campaign in 2016 was in disarray. We had the current affair tape. They were desperate. They thought that this Stormy Daniels case could be a death shot to their campaign. You had the middle part of their trial, which was all the money trails. And then it finished up with Michael Cohen. And so it's just the way that juries think, in my mind. I think that juries make up their mind fairly quickly in the entire process, and then they're like anybody else. If you've ever dealt with a Packers fan, then you know this already. It's difficult to talk sense to some people, right? But you get the jury sort of buying into their theory somewhat early, and then it's hard to change their mind. So by the time Michael Cohen takes a stand, this thing has probably long since been over. So that's something that I think the prosecution did a fairly effective job of. I think the jury's going to come back and tell us that they reviewed the charges a couple times, that it was probably 10-2 guilty, 9-3 guilty at the first straw vote, and that they just kind of kept going and were able to get whatever holdouts there were. Maybe it was 12-0, and they just said, well, we have to review this all because we can't come back with a 15-minute verdict. So those are the things I would expect to hear from this panel.
Jeremy, just very quickly, an independent judiciary is a pillar of democracy, and now we've got Trump casting doubts on the integrity of the U.S. legal system. Do you have any broader fears? Just quickly.
The institutions in this country are sacred. I'm a lawyer. I love what I do. I'm an advocate for my profession and for the legal system. Sunshine is the best disinfectant. I mean,
Yep.
and the fact we're talking about it is a good thing.
Yeah.
And hopefully people can see and trust their institutions in this country.
And we'll do it some more, Jeremy. Thank you so much. Jeremy Rosenthal, trial attorney. Well, joining us now on the program is Wendy Chen, Senior Investment Analyst for GAM Investments. So, Wendy, you probably heard me do just a few moments ago these disappointing PMI numbers out of China. The official PMI coming in contraction mode, 49.5. That was a full point below the estimate of 50.5 in a Bloomberg survey. The non-manufacturing PMI was 51.1, and that was slightly lower than the 51.5 in the survey. Your early thoughts on what's happening with manufacturing in China?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this definitely come as a slight disappointment for the market, as people are expecting to see another month of expansion just to keep the theme of the past 2 months and supported by a kind of healthy order book on the manufacturing side. But however, we probably need to focus on what does it mean for the regulator to counter-react on that, because the PMI is pretty much the first major monthly data that's come out on every month. So it's definitely impact on the pace of fiscal and the monetary policy to follow, such as the intensity of the monetary easing as well as the government bond issuance, which, to be frank, has been behind schedule a little bit.
We have a headline on the Bloomberg terminal at the moment, which kind of captures a lot. And it simply says, China's 60 million homes are hard to sell, even in big cities. Tell us what your thoughts are on the progress being made in the property market in China.
Yeah, actually, the property easing package that's announced in mid last month in May has been better than market expected, because it's for the first time they started to focusing on supporting the inventory digestion rather than complete the ongoing projects. So I think, especially time-wise, since we have the third plenum that have been delayed for a year coming up in July, we're expecting to hear more probably policy to address the property as well as the lingering inventory problem.
So the inventory that's there, there's a lot of unsold homes, obviously, and then there are some people that just don't even put their place up for sale because they don't think they can find a buyer now. If we were to target some of the policy developments that we've seen, what do you think will work the best?
Well, I think in terms of the policy, one thing is definitely to get people reassured that they can consume and can buy home. And with the current sentiment and the deflationary environment, it's definitely not helping. So that's why we're expecting probably some sort of social welfare reform to coming up in the July 3rd plenary, as well as hopefully some rural land reform that can opening up the precautionary saving of people on buying houses as well as consumption.
You know, some of the changes that they've mooted for the hukou system, I'm curious, is that working? Are people feeling freer now to move to different areas around the country and find work?
Well, the rural versus urban one is still, I would say, relatively stable as it ever been. So anything that could release up this massive magnitude of rural population movement could help to solve the current China problem that we've been all facing.
So if I'm an investor and I'm thinking of kind of capturing a little mean reversion in China, a rebound after a pretty rough period here over the past year, admittedly, we've seen a little bit of a jump in the past couple of months, but some would say that China is still cheap. Hong Kong and China are both still cheap. what offers some of the best opportunities? If you can't talk individual companies, at least talk themes or sectors.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely, as you mentioned, that China has been kind of dropped to the bottom of the sentiment and cheap as well as low on positioning. So we definitely prefer those names that's having some fundamental support, either from policy tailwind or from structural changes. And those are the technology innovation, since the government trying to promote the self-reliance, as well as the structural benefiting sectors such as green energy and EV.
Yeah, we just heard about the Big Fund 3, and that's $47.5 billion that's been put into a fund to help stimulate development in that area, semiconductors and such. I want to ask you kind of a critical question that may be hard to answer, but the constraints that have been put on the high-tech sector in China by the United States and others, do you think that actually hurts China or that it stimulates China to do more? And that's why I mentioned that Big Fund 3.
Yeah.
Will it actually lead to faster development in China?
Well, it depends on whether China can pull through this whole semiconductor restriction, just like it pulled through with the green energy a decade before. So the problem is right now, at least on the foundry side, China still probably have quite a big gap with the world leading players such as TSM and the counterpart in the U.S. So it's really take a lot of money and investment and a lot of patience for China to develop that industry. And maybe, I don't know, so like for some of these sectors such as cloud, China have already been leading. So maybe it can build on the semi side, but definitely need more patience.
Okay, Wendy, thank you for joining us here live on the program and in our studios in Hong Kong. Wendy Chen, Senior Investment Analyst at GAM Investments. This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Asia podcast, bringing you the stories making news and moving markets in the Asia Pacific. Visit the Bloomberg Podcast channel on YouTube to get more episodes of this and other shows from Bloomberg. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen. And always on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Terminal, and the Bloomberg Business app.